Hi, and thank you for choosing to listen to Master of Horror. We will take a stroll into the depths of the unknown with these three true, scary stories. Okay, my friends, let's begin.
True, scary, paranormal story number 1, The Horseman.
This true paranormal story was told by my grandmother to me many years ago. The story takes place in Corpus Christi, Texas, out in the country. This was around the time that my grandmother was a teenager, most likely around 15 or 16 years old. She lived in the country in a one-story old house. It was on a couple of acres. She lived with her 4 siblings and mother and father. My grandmother and her siblings slept in the living room as their home was only a one-bedroom house. She said that they would hear noises in the middle of the night, all around the outside of their house. This usually occurred between the hours of 1 in the morning to 4 in the morning. She said it sounded as if there were horses galloping all around the house. They would also hear screaming coming from outside, and at one point, giggling sounds came from right outside their window. Sometimes they would peek outside to see nothing at all. When they would have to use the restroom, they would have to go outside because they didn't have a bathroom in the home. Most of the time, they would try to hold it because they were terrified to go outside alone. One time, my grandmother had no choice and went outside in the middle of the night to use the bathroom. She tried to hurry up and quickly get back in the house as fast as possible. As she was about to leave the outhouse, she said she heard something on 2 feet running in circles around the outhouse that she was in. It was breathing heavily, and it was running at an inhuman speed. She leaned against the door and prayed to God to protect her from whatever was outside. As soon as the noises stopped, she bolted to the house. At the time, they did not own any horses or large farm animals, just small chickens, dogs, and cats. So there was no explanation for the loud sounds they encountered outside their home. She would tell her parents about the paranormal occurrences, but they insisted that she had a nightmare or that maybe she was just imagining it. But everything changed one winter night when it was extremely cold outside. This was around the 1930s, so they didn't have electricity in every room. They had a fireplace in the living room to warm them up at night when it would get extremely cold. She said this one night they decided to go to bed kind of early, and they put out the fire that was illuminating the living room. It became pitch dark, and they eventually fell to sleep. All of a sudden, they were woken up around 2 in the morning by the sound of horses galloping around their house. But this time, they also heard men talking. She said it sounded like soldiers walking past their house. The sounds of metal objects clanking together also can be heard. They opened the window to look out of it, but saw nothing. She said her sisters began to cry, and she tried her best to comfort them. She was afraid to wake up her father, knowing that he would get extremely upset. Eventually, the sound stopped, and they were able to fall back to sleep. But not even 30 minutes later, they were awoken by the sound of a horse galloping inside the living room where they were sleeping. She looked up and was able to see the silhouette of a man on top of the horse as it was stomping all over the wooden floors. They all began screaming. That's when her father and mother woke up and went to the living room, and what they saw shocked them to the core. When they saw this, they also began to scream and began praying out loud, hoping it would stop. After about 20 seconds, the apparition disappeared with the sounds. Smaller paranormal occurrences began to plague the family for a couple of months, until one day they were remodeling the patio of their home, and they uncovered a book with a voodoo-like doll. There was a paper and some crystals in a small bag. When they saw this, they got terrified, knowing that this was something evil. After throwing it away and getting their home blessed more than one time, the paranormal occurrences finally ceased. My grandmother has since passed away in 2002, but I will never forget the story she told me, as these things rarely happen these days.
Scary Paranormal True Story number 2. The Haunted Book.
I write stories, especially horror and paranormal true stories, and I usually don't get much views on them. I was running out of stories and ideas. So one day I went to the library to look up any kind of horror stories I could find, and maybe I could choose the scariest ones, just to be able to write about it. Then maybe I might get some kind of views. Once in the library, I made my way into the nonfiction scary section. I grabbed a bunch of old books on cryptids, UFOs, and other paranormal sightings. I was hoping that something there at the library would ignite my imagination. As I was in one of the aisles looking through the books, I heard a book fall to the ground behind me, which made me turn around. An old-looking book had fallen off the shelf onto the wooden floor. I felt that I had to put it back, so I placed my stack of books on the side and bent down to pick up the book from the floor. But as soon as I touched the book, I was flooded with emotions, like a cold shower running over me. I was happy, sad, scared, and angry all at the same time. I stood up slowly, soaked in sweat from the emotional rush, and turned the book over in my hand. It was a hardback book. It was brown in color and looked to be really old. The cover looked and felt like leather, but was lumpy, not smooth, and had randomly stitched ridges running through it. It was heavier than it looked, and I could smell a musty odor that I couldn't quite label. I should have put it back then, or I should have put it back on the floor and walked away, but I didn't. Flipping the book from front to back, I noticed there were no book titles or authors mentioned on it, nor was there the normal book details. There wasn't even a library barcode attached to the spine. I opened the book and slowly thumbed through the first few pages. Its pages were yellowed and darkened, likely because of its age. The paper felt thick, and the texture was rougher than the newer books. The ink was a little faded and smudged, and was a dark red color. There was no book name or author details on the first few pages, but the third page had an image on it that made the hairs on my neck stand up, and my heart skip a beat. Spread across the 2 pages, drawn in dark red and black ink, was the most terrifying demon-like creature I had ever seen. Its face was depicted to have exposed muscle with little overworldly tendrils poking out between the overlapping muscles. Its mouth, which spread from ear to ear, was wide. It had a terrifying snarl exposing multiple rows of dagger-like teeth and a forked tongue. It had 3 crooked horns that sat up upon its head, the mismatched deformities somehow making it even more menacing. It had 2 sets of arms, one set that reached out in front of it and ended in 3 sharp claws, and the other that seemed to double as front legs that ended in a sharp foot-like dagger. But it was the creature's eyes that truly sent shivers down my spine. Multiple orbs, each one a different size, dotted its elongated head, similar to that of a spider. And even though this was just a drawing, the eyes seemed to follow me as I moved the book around. Reading the description below the image, I found what the name of the demon was. I was really into demonology and was confident I had come across the most valuable book I could ever find. At that point, I knew I had found the subject of my new story that I wanted to write about, and that this would be a breakthrough story. I thought as I slipped the book into my backpack and left the library. I could not check the book out after all. There was no tag on the book or barcode. Empty cans of Red Bull started to pile up on my desk as I wrote a tale darker than any I had ever done before. 5 hours and a half and a dozen Red Bulls later, I had written around 4,000 words and feeling great. I decided then that I would shop this story around publishers, as I could already see this story jetting off into a series of spin-offs. I had thought this was my golden ticket. I stretched my arms over my head, my back cracking with relief. I twisted it left to right in my seat. I remember glancing out the window and looking down at the streetlights that illuminated the road. I then turned toward my screen when something moved. A shadow-like figure emerged from the depths of the dark outside. It was slowly shuffling in the direction towards my house. It was a large silhouette. It looked like a large animal. What exactly, I wasn't sure. I squinted my eyes as I strained to make out details. It appeared as though the figure had antlers or something similar on its head. As the creature walked closer to the streetlight then began flickering and then, abruptly, went dark, casting the entire street in blackness. Staring out into the darkness, my heart skipped 2 beats and a shiver ran down my spine. A few seconds had passed by when the silence of the night was shattered by an ear-piercing scream. Even though my window was closed, my body automatically reacted. My hands shot straight up to cover my ears. Then suddenly, the screaming stopped, and the streetlights flickered back on. I nervously glanced back out the window. I remember breathing out the breath that I had been holding in and trying to calm myself down, thinking that the screams that I heard was most likely some wild animal, probably a wild owl, and the large animal probably got spooked when the lights cut out, causing it to run away. I checked the time, and it was already past 3 in the morning. I thought maybe I was feeling scared because I hadn't eaten anything all day. So I got up and closed my laptop. I left my room. I then headed downstairs to the kitchen to raid the fridge. I remember making a sandwich really quick, not wanting to cook a large meal. As I was shuffling around for the lettuce, the lights in the kitchen started flickering before cutting out, leaving only the light from the fridge just to illuminate the whole kitchen. I began getting scared once again, hoping that this had nothing to do with the book of the creature that I saw outside the window. I quickly opened one of the drawers next to the fridge and grabbed a small flashlight that I kept for emergency purposes. The fuse box was downstairs in the basement area, and there was no way I was going down there with no light. I turned on the flashlight, and I made my way back down the basement. I felt a cold rush of air as I swung the door open. I pointed the light down the wooden stairs to the concrete floor, revealing a narrow path leading deep into the darkness. The beam of the flashlight seemed to fade as it reached the bottom of the stairs. After descending the stairs and making it to the bottom, I spotted the mounted fuse box. As I was making my way to the fuse box, I heard a rattling noise. I quickly pointed the flashlight towards the sound that I heard, which was in between some tall shelves in the basement. That's when I caught something moving in between the shelves. I tried to aim the light at it through the shelves, but it was elusive and always seemed to evade the beam of light. I figured maybe it was nothing, or maybe I was so scared I was just imagining this. I quickly put down the flashlight and opened the fuse box. I quickly flipped a few switches, hoping to restore the lights. That's when I heard a click, and in an instant, the basement lit up. I grabbed my flashlight and turned it off. I put the flashlight in one of my pant pockets and made my way back to the stairs. But when I got to the stairs, I heard a click, and the light in the basement went out. I was engulfed in darkness once again. I fumbled around trying to pull out the flashlight that was in my pant pocket, and that's when I felt a warm breath on the back of my neck. I was petrified, frozen, unable to move in the darkness. Then I heard what sounded like a growl from right behind me. Gathering whatever courage I could muster, I quickly spun around, pointing the light at whatever was behind me. but nothing was there. Once again, I heard a noise where the shelves were, and I quickly shined the light towards the shelves. There, I saw a silhouette, huge and tall, hunched over, almost touching the ceiling with its seemingly long horns, 3 crooked ones. I turned around and bolted straight for the basement stairs. I slammed the door behind me. That's when I heard the basement stairs creaking loudly, as if it was ascending the stairs. When I heard this, I ran straight for the front door with my flashlight in my hand, lighting the way. When I reached the front door, I quickly unlocked it and swung it open. As soon as I made it outside, I slammed the front door closed. I then waited outside by the street for a friend to come and pick me up. That following morning, I went back to my house, this time not alone. I put the book in my backpack and ran out of that house. I took the book straight back to the library. I went to the librarian desk to tell her about the book and give it back to her. I then opened my backpack, and to my shock, it was not there. The book had vanished in thin air. It literally disappeared. To this day, I do not know where it's at or how it just vanished. I do know that the haunting that I experienced was the last. Nothing else paranormal occurred after that horrifying day. I wrote this true story that happened to me as a warning to not make the same mistake that I did. If you happen to come across a book with no title or doesn't look like your normal book, don't take any chances. Just leave it be.
Scary, true paranormal story number 3. The Faceless Entity.
This happened back in 2007. I was around 9 years old. I had never really experienced anything that can be considered paranormal in my house, but on one lonely night that would all change. It was around midnight when I happened to wake up as usual. My bedroom door was open with the hallway light turned on. When I turned over and opened my eyes, I saw something. It was a dark, faceless figure looming in the corner of my room. I didn't know what to think or do. Upon seeing this, I was more curious than anything, trying to figure out what it wanted. The tall figure continued to linger around and just stared at me. Looking back, I can honestly say that I wasn't experiencing sleep paralysis. This seemed far too real to even be a dream. I decided to slowly turn around and face the wall. I just covered myself up with a blanket and closed my eyes. The next morning, I decided not to tell my parents about the dark figure. They were extremely religious, and honestly, I didn't want to scare them. After a while, I ended up telling my mom about it. Luckily, she took it pretty well. Instead of flipping out on me, she told me she had also witnessed something similar. But her encounter was much more disturbing than mine. According to her, a dark figure also appeared to her in the middle of the night. She tried to wake up my father, but he remained asleep. Suddenly, the dark figure moved in and began to choke her. She began to pray, and the dark figure eventually loosened its grip and backed away. It then disappeared. It was only after it was gone that my father woke up. I think the entity also attacked me as well, but in a different way, because ever since I had that encounter, scary things have happened to me over the years. I am now 23 years old, and I still live in that same haunted house. Thankfully, I have never experienced anything like that ever since, and I can only speculate as to what the dark tall figure was and what its real intentions were.